Thanks for tuning in to Cheating Confessions. Don't miss the jaw-dropping conclusion. I didn't immediately notice that my heart had sped up as we approached the house. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary. The tall wooden fence, the old flower beds with wilting plants, and the familiar scent of freshly cut grass. I was gripping Ethan's hand as we stood on the doorstep. We had arrived for yet another family gathering in Riverdale, a small, quiet city in the Midwest. The weather was warm, typical for late summer, and the evening sun cast long shadows across the yard. Everything appeared normal, but something about this visit made me uneasy. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I glanced at the front door, feeling a dull ringing inside me, growing stronger with every passing moment. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, turning slightly to look at me. His voice had that steady calmness that had always reassured me, though today it felt distant. "Yes, of course," I replied quickly, forcing a smile. I told myself there was nothing unusual about this evening. It was just another family dinner at my mother's house. But deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something about today felt different, as though an invisible force was slowly building up inside me, like water being displaced when you drop a stone into a still pond. Ethan, my husband of nearly 15 years, didn't seem to notice my unease. He never really did. It wasn't in his nature to look too deeply into things. He always kept to the surface, believing what he saw was all there was. Maybe that's why I'd started feeling this distance between us, this gap that kept growing larger with time. And perhaps that was also why I found myself drawn to someone who looked a little deeper. We stepped inside and the familiar hum of family chatter greeted us. My mother, Margaret, was bustling about, as always, organising the evening with trays of food and drinks. Her house had always been the gathering spot for these family events, filled with warmth and noise. The living room, with its soft yellow lighting and large, comfortable furniture, made the atmosphere feel cosy. Everything seemed perfect, just as it always had. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to blend into the familiar routine, to lose myself in the usual hustle and bustle of family life, but I couldn't. Something was stopping me. Then I saw him, Logan, my stepfather. He stood by the large bay window at the far end of the room holding a glass of wine. He looked out over the backyard where the sun was slowly setting behind the trees. The light framed him in a way that made him seem like a permanent fixture in the house, an inseparable part of it. But I knew that wasn't true. Logan had never truly belonged here. He was always on the periphery, especially after marrying my mother when I was already grown. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen him this close in years. Since his marriage to Margaret, we'd rarely interacted outside of family functions, and when we did, it was always brief, formal. But even those brief moments felt jarring, like a reminder of something I had long tried to forget. His eyes caught mine across the room, and in that moment, it was as if time slowed. The steady ground beneath me shifted, like someone had turned a key and unlocked a door I had sealed long ago. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself this was just a family dinner, nothing more. But as I held Ethan's hand, I could feel that familiar tension building up inside me. Logan held my gaze for what felt like an eternity, and I quickly looked away, hoping Ethan hadn't noticed. He didn't. As usual, Ethan was chatting about work, laughing and gesturing with his free hand as we moved into the living room. He hadn't noticed a thing. Ethan never noticed things like that. He was always so wrapped up in his own world, with his job as a sales director for a local construction company keeping him constantly busy. Maybe that's why I found myself drifting away from him, especially over the last year. "Everything looks great, Mom," Ethan said as he greeted Margaret, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. She beamed at him, wiping her hands on her apron and fussing over the appetizers she had set out on the dining room table. The warm smell of baked lasagna and fresh bread wafted through the air, familiar and comforting. I nodded and smiled, pretending to be present, but in reality I was elsewhere. I felt a strange pull, an invisible thread tugging me toward the man standing across the room. Logan. He was still standing by the window, looking out into the darkening backyard. But his posture had changed. His gaze was no longer distant. He was watching me now, carefully, as if studying every movement, every gesture. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising tide of emotions that had been locked away for so long. I told myself this was just a regular evening, just another family dinner. But the air felt heavy around me, thick with unspoken words. Without a word, Logan began to move. His steps were slow, deliberate, as he made his way toward where I was standing with Ethan. I felt frozen in place, knowing that any moment he would be right next to me, and the distance between us, the emotional one I had been trying so hard to maintain, would be gone. "Hi, Kate," he said in a steady, familiar tone as he stopped just a few feet from me. "Hi, Logan," I replied, my voice quieter than I had intended, almost a whisper. His name felt foreign on my lips, as though it was a word I shouldn't be allowed to say out loud. There was something forbidden about even speaking to him now, something that made my heart race and my palms sweat. Unaware of the tension between us, Ethan turned to Logan, smiling warmly. "Good to see you, man. Everything going well?" Logan smiled back at Ethan, but I could sense the subtle shift in his demeanor, the way his eyes flickered between us as if searching for something. "Yeah, things are good. You know how it is," he said casually, but his eyes locked on mine for a split second longer than necessary. As Ethan turned to chat with someone else in the room, I felt the space around me shrink as if Logan and I were suddenly alone in this crowded living room. The soft hum of voices and laughter faded into the background. "You look beautiful," Logan said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, but the words cut through me like a knife. There was something about the way he said it that made me feel like he knew far more than he should. "Thank you," I replied quickly, trying to sound unaffected, but my heart was pounding in my chest. It felt like there was an invisible cord wrapped around my throat, tightening with every passing second. I glanced down at the glass of wine in his hand, noticing the way his fingers gripped the stem. Steady, controlled. I wondered how much of that control was an act, how much he was holding back. "Are you happy, Kate?" he asked suddenly, his voice low, almost as if he didn't want anyone else to hear the question. I blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in conversation. My mind raced as I searched for a response. "I'm fine, of course," I said, forcing a smile, but the truth was I didn't know how to answer him. I wasn't fine, and I knew it. But how could I admit that to him? Of all people. "Are you?" Logan asked again, his voice probing, cutting deeper. He wasn't asking about the evening or small talk, he was asking about something much bigger, something we both knew but hadn't spoken about for years. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to admit the truth to him or to myself. "Yes, I am," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. He raised an eyebrow, his gaze softening, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe me, and, deep down, I knew he saw through the mask I had carefully built over time. Just then, Ethan returned with a plate of appetizers, smiling as he handed me one. "You okay?" he asked, completely unaware of the tension that had just passed between Logan and me. His face was warm and relaxed, the way it always was during family dinners. I nodded quickly, grateful for the distraction. "Yeah, just thinking," I said, forcing a smile. But inside I could feel my world crumbling. As the evening wore on, I found myself drifting in and out of conversations, trying to focus on what was happening around me but feeling more disconnected than ever. The voices of my family faded into the background, and all I could think about was Logan. Every time I glanced in his direction, he was already looking at me. The weight of his gaze was overwhelming, suffocating. After dinner, we moved to the back porch where the night air was cool and the sound of crickets filled the silence. Ethan and my brother Nick were deep in conversation about work, their voices blending into the night. I stood at the edge of the porch, looking out at the darkened trees in the distance, trying to clear my mind. But I felt him before I saw him. Logan had followed me outside. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, standing just a few feet behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what he was going to say. About what? I asked, my voice low, trembling. You know what, Kate, he said softly. We can't keep pretending this doesn't exist. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the reality of his words. I had spent so long pretending that everything was fine, that I was happy, that my life was as perfect as it seemed. But it wasn't. The truth had been bubbling under the surface for years, and now it was threatening to erupt. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered, even though I knew exactly what he meant. Yes, you do, Logan said, his voice firm but gentle. Whatever this is between us, it's not going away. I turned around to face him, the darkness of the yard surrounding us like a cocoon, hiding us from the rest of the world. My heart was racing, and I could feel the weight of everything we had been avoiding pressing down on me. We can't do this, I said, shaking my head. You're married to my mother, and I'm married to Ethan. This is wrong. I know it's wrong, he replied, stepping closer, his eyes locked on mine. But I can't help how I feel, can you? His question hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I wanted to run, to escape from this moment, from him. But I couldn't move. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt completely vulnerable, exposed. He had always seen right through me, past the walls I had built, past the lies I had told myself. And now, standing there in the quiet of the night, I realized that I couldn't lie to him anymore. No, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I can't help it either. In that moment, everything shifted. The years of tension, the unspoken feelings, the hidden glances, it all came rushing to the surface. I didn't know how we had gotten here, but I knew there was no going back. Logan took another step forward, closing the distance between us. I could feel the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. My heart pounded in my chest, and every nerve in my body was on edge. We need to stop this before it goes any further, I said, my voice shaky. But even as I said the words, I knew they held no weight. Logan didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, barely there, but it sent a shockwave through my entire body. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. I should have stepped back, but instead, I stayed frozen in place. The space between us seemed to vanish, and for the first time in years, I felt completely exposed. Logan's hand lingered on mine for a moment longer before he pulled it away, but the intensity of that brief touch reverberated through me like an electric current. We should go inside, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but it trembled as I spoke. The reality of what was happening weighed down on me like a heavy blanket, suffocating my thoughts. I needed to pull away, to put distance between us before we crossed a line we couldn't uncross. But Logan wasn't moving. We need to talk, Kate, he said again, his voice softer this time, almost pleading. We can't just keep ignoring this. I looked away, staring into the darkness of the backyard, where the outline of the trees blurred against the night sky. A breeze swept through, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and leaves, but it did nothing to cool the heat rising between us. I can't do this, Logan, I finally said, forcing the words out. It's not right. I know, he replied, his voice quiet but firm. But do you really think we can keep pretending like nothing is happening? I see it in your eyes every time we're in the same room. I feel it when we talk, even if it's just for a few minutes. You feel it too, don't you? I opened my mouth to deny it, to push him away with the same lies I'd been telling myself for years. But the truth was there, sitting in my chest, and it refused to be silenced any longer. Yes, I whispered, barely able to believe the word had escaped my lips. Logan exhaled, his shoulders relaxing as if he had been holding in his breath for far too long. I don't know what to do anymore, Kate, he said, stepping closer again. I thought I could handle this, that I could ignore it, but I can't. I'm going crazy trying to pretend I don't feel the way I do about you. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something inside me. For years, I had tried to maintain a wall between us, tried to convince myself that what I felt was nothing more than a fleeting attraction, something I could push aside. But now, standing so close to him, I knew it was more than that. It always had been. "I don't know what you want me to say," I replied, my voice strained with emotion. "You're married to my mother. I'm married to Ethan. This can't happen." "I know," he said, nodding, but his eyes told me that he didn't care. "But does that change how we feel?" I was silent, my heart pounding in my ears. The answer was obvious, but it was a truth I wasn't ready to face. "We've both changed," he continued, his voice low. "We're not the same people we were when you first introduced me to your mother. Life doesn't fit into neat boxes, Kate. You know that." I looked away, blinking back the tears that were threatening to fall. Everything he was saying was true, but it didn't make this any less wrong. "I'm leaving," I said suddenly, my voice shaking. "I can't stand here and talk about this with you, not right now." "Kate!" Logan called after me, but I didn't turn back. I stepped inside the house, feeling the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. The warmth and noise of the family celebration greeted me, but I felt like I was in a completely different world. Ethan was laughing with my brother, his face relaxed, completely unaware of what had just transpired outside. I moved through the living room, pretending to listen to my mother, but my mind was miles away. I couldn't stop thinking about Logan, about the tension that had built between us for years. It had always been there, lurking beneath the surface, but now it was out in the open, undeniable. For the rest of the evening, I tried to act normal, to smile and laugh with everyone else. But inside, I felt like I was crumbling. Every glance Logan and I exchanged was loaded with unspoken words, and every moment I spent pretending with Ethan made me feel more trapped. Finally, the evening came to an end, and we said our goodbyes. As we left, I could feel Logan's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. Ethan wrapped his arm around my shoulder as we walked to the car, and I leaned into him, trying to draw comfort from his familiar warmth. But all I could think about was what had happened on the porch, and how I was going to carry the weight of that secret with me. The drive home was quiet. Ethan was talking about something from the evening, but I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, replaying everything Logan had said, every glance, every touch. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to move forward from this. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of daily life, work, errands, small conversations with Ethan. But my mind was constantly elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about Logan, about the weight of what we had left unsaid. I tried to focus on work at the marketing firm where I'd been for the past 5 years, but even there my thoughts drifted back to that night on the porch. It was a Wednesday afternoon when my mother called, asking for help with another family dinner that weekend. Ethan was swamped at work, as usual, and my brother Nick was out of town, so she asked if Logan could come with me to the supermarket to pick up the groceries. I hesitated for a moment, the tension from our last conversation still fresh in my mind, but I agreed. It seemed like the most natural thing to do, and refusing would raise suspicion. But as soon as I hung up, I felt that familiar unease wash over me. That Saturday, I found myself sitting in the passenger seat of Logan's truck, staring out the window as we drove to Riverdale Market, one of the largest grocery stores in the area. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the trees lining the highway. The quiet between us was thick, palpable, and I could feel Logan's presence like a weight in the air. "How have things been?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, careful, but I could sense the deeper meaning behind his words. "Fine," I replied, a little too quickly. "Everything's fine." He nodded but didn't press further. The hum of the engine filled the space between us, and for a while neither of us spoke. I kept my gaze fixed on the road ahead, hoping that by avoiding eye contact, I could keep some control over the situation. But Logan's presence was too close, too overwhelming. We arrived at the market, and I hurried out of the truck, clutching the shopping list my mother had given me. Logan followed closely behind as we entered the brightly lit store. The air was cool, the aisles wide and bustling with weekend shoppers. "I'll grab the vegetables," I said, trying to maintain some distance. "You can get the drinks and bread." He nodded again and we split up. As I moved down the produce aisle, my hands shook as I picked up items from the list. Carrots, onions, potatoes. I told myself this was just a normal errand, but the tension in my chest said otherwise. Suddenly, Logan appeared at my side, a basket in hand. "Do you need help with anything else?" I shook my head, avoiding his gaze. "I'm fine. I've got it." But he didn't leave. He stood there watching me, and I could feel the heat rising between us again. My heart pounded as I placed the last of the vegetables in the cart and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Kate, we need to talk." I froze, gripping the handle of the cart. "Here? Now?" I whispered harshly, looking around at the other shoppers moving past us. He glanced around too, his jaw tight. "It doesn't matter where. We can't keep avoiding this." I could feel the storm inside me building, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I wanted to leave, to walk out of the store and pretend none of this was happening, but the reality of the situation was inescapable. There was no pretending anymore. "We're in a supermarket, Logan," I hissed, keeping my voice low. "This isn't the time or place." "It's never the right time or place, Kate," he said, his voice firm but quiet. "But we can't keep pretending. You can't keep pretending." I looked up at him, his eyes piercing through me, and I knew he was right. I had been pretending for so long, pretending that my life with Ethan was enough, that I didn't feel this pull toward Logan. But every time I saw him, every time we exchanged even the smallest glance, the truth became harder to ignore. "What do you want from me, Logan?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I just know I can't keep pretending like you don't matter to me, that we don't matter." The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump, but terrified of the fall. "We can't do this," I whispered. "It's wrong. We both know it." "I know it's wrong," he said, his voice raw. "But that doesn't change how I feel." I shook my head, feeling the tears pricking the corners of my eyes. "We need to stop." He looked at me, his expression torn, but I could see the struggle in his eyes. For a moment I thought he might argue, but then he nodded, his shoulders sagging as if in defeat. "Okay," he whispered, barely audible. "If that's what you want." I swallowed hard, nodding, but the weight of the decision felt like it was crushing me from the inside. We finished the shopping in silence, moving through the aisles as if nothing had happened, but the heaviness lingered between us, making every step feel like a chore. I didn't look at him again, afraid that if I did, I would lose the fragile grip I had on myself. We loaded the groceries into the back of Logan's truck, the sun now fully set, leaving only the soft glow of the streetlights in the parking lot. The air was cooler, and the hum of crickets filled the silence between us. I slid into the passenger seat, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. The drive back to my mother's house was quiet. Logan kept his eyes on the road, his jaw set, and I stared out the window, watching the trees blur by. Neither of us said a word, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick, suffocating, filled with all the things we weren't saying. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light cast long shadows across the yard. Logan turned off the engine, but neither of us moved to get out of the truck. "I don't want this to end like this, Kate," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, rough with emotion. I didn't look at him, keeping my eyes fixed on the house. "It has to," I whispered. "We can't keep going like this. It's not fair to anyone." "Fair?" Logan let out a bitter laugh. "Do you think any of this is fair? Life isn't fair, Kate. It never has been." I turned to face him then, the pain in his eyes cutting me deeply. "I know it's not fair," I said, my voice shaking. "But this is the choice we made. We chose these lives. You married my mother, I married Ethan. That's the reality." "Reality," he repeated, his voice laced with frustration. I know what reality is, but what about what we feel? Doesn't that count for anything? I couldn't answer him. What could I say? That I had been lying to myself for years? That I had convinced myself that my marriage to Ethan was everything I had ever wanted, only to realize that it wasn't enough? That the pull I felt toward Logan was stronger than anything I had ever felt before? But none of that mattered now. It couldn't. We need to stop, I repeated, my voice firmer this time. Before this goes any further. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, he sighed. Okay, he whispered, if that's what you want. I swallowed hard, my heart aching, but I knew this was the only way. We both got out of the truck, unloading the groceries in silence. When we finished, Logan gave me one last look before heading inside. I stood on the porch for a moment, trying to collect myself, before following him in. The next few weeks passed uneventfully. Ethan was busy with work, as always, and I threw myself into my own job, trying to fill the void left by the unresolved tension between Logan and me. I avoided family gatherings whenever I could, making excuses about work or feeling unwell. I knew my mother was starting to notice, but I couldn't bring myself to care. All I needed was distance, time to let things cool down. But time didn't fix anything. The more I tried to push Logan out of my mind, the more his presence haunted me. Every time I walked past the window where we had stood that night, I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. Every time I heard his voice over the phone when he called my mother, I felt a pang of guilt and longing. I knew I had made the right decision, but that didn't make it any easier. Then, one evening, it all came crashing down. Ethan had been working late at the office again, so I had spent the day at home, catching up on some work of my own. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I had just settled on the couch with a glass of wine when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from Logan. We need to talk. My heart sank. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I didn't want to open the message, didn't want to see what else he had to say. But something inside me, something I couldn't control, made me tap the screen. Please, just meet me one last time. I can't leave things like this. I should have deleted the message. I should have blocked his number, ignored him, done anything but what I was about to do. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself standing up, grabbing my keys and walking out the door. I drove to Logan's apartment, the small one he rented near his job in the city, knowing full well what I was doing but feeling powerless to stop it. My heart was racing the entire drive, and by the time I arrived, my hands were trembling. When I knocked on the door, he opened it almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for me. His expression was serious, conflicted, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. The apartment was simple, sparsely decorated with just the essentials: a couch, a coffee table, a TV on the wall. It was a far cry from the home he shared with my mother. This place felt temporary, like a stopover in someone's life rather than a home. I stood awkwardly near the door, unsure of what to say. The silence between us stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. "I don't know why I'm here," I finally said, my voice barely audible. "I do," Logan replied softly, "because we can't keep pretending." I stood there, frozen, staring at Logan as his words hung in the air. The weight of what was happening pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. My mind was telling me to leave, to turn around and walk out the door before things got even more complicated. But my heart wasn't listening. "I'm not pretending," I said quietly, but the words felt hollow, even as they left my lips. Logan stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. "Yes, you are," he said softly. "You've been pretending for years. We both have." I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at him. He was right. I had spent so long pretending that everything was fine with Ethan, pretending that I didn't feel this pull toward Logan, pretending that I could go on living a life that wasn't really mine. But now, standing here in Logan's apartment, I couldn't pretend anymore. "What do you want from me, Logan?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What do you expect me to do?" He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair away from my face. The touch was light, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't expect anything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just need you to be honest with yourself. Be honest with me." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the emotions swirling inside me, but it was no use. Every feeling I had buried, every thought I had pushed aside came rushing to the surface. I couldn't deny it anymore. "I don't know how to fix this," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to stop feeling this way." "You don't have to fix it," he replied, stepping even closer. "Just stop running from it." I opened my eyes, and for the first time, I let myself really see him, the man I had tried so hard to ignore, the man who had been in my life for so long, but who had always felt like something more than just my stepfather. I had spent years denying the feelings I had for him, but now they were out in the open, undeniable. Logan took another step forward, and suddenly, the space between us was gone. I could feel the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. My heart was pounding, and every nerve in my body was on high alert. I knew this was wrong. I knew that crossing this line would change everything, but I couldn't stop it. Without thinking, I reached out, my fingers brushing against his hand. The moment our skin touched, it was like a floodgate had opened. All the tension, all the unspoken words, all the emotions we had been holding back, it all came rushing out. Logan cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "We don't have to pretend anymore, Kate," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I closed the remaining distance between us, and in one swift movement, our lips met. The kiss was electric, charged with all the emotions we had been hiding for so long. It was both desperate and tender, filled with the intensity of years of restraint finally breaking free. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Nothing else mattered. There was no Ethan, no mother, no consequences. Just Logan and me in this moment, giving in to everything we had tried so hard to suppress. But as quickly as it had started, reality came crashing back. I pulled away, my heart racing, the weight of what we had just done settling over me like a heavy fog. I took a step back, shaking my head. "We can't do this," I said, my voice barely audible. "This is wrong. This is so wrong." Logan looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of longing and regret. "I know," he whispered, "but we can't take it back now." The truth of his words hit me hard. There was no undoing what had just happened. We had crossed a line and there was no going back. I felt a rush of panic, the enormity of the situation crashing down on me all at once. "I have to go," I said quickly, grabbing my purse and heading for the door. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the doorknob, and I could feel Logan's eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at him. "Kate, wait!" he started, but I didn't let him finish. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I can't do this. I can't. I'm sorry." With that, I opened the door and hurried out of the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face as I rushed to my car. My mind was spinning, my emotions all over the place. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I couldn't believe I had let it happen. As I drove away from Logan's apartment, tears blurred my vision. I knew I had made a huge mistake, a mistake that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I drove in silence, my grip tight on the steering wheel as I sped down the empty streets of Riverdale. The reality of what had just happened weighed heavily on me, suffocating me. I could still feel Logan's touch lingering on my skin, the heat of his breath against my lips, the taste of his kiss. But more than that, I could feel the overwhelming guilt crashing down, a tidal wave of shame that threatened to pull me under. How had I let this happen? How had I let things go so far? I knew I should go straight home, back to Ethan, But the thought of facing him, of looking into his trusting eyes after what I had just done, made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I needed to clear my head, to figure out how I was going to fix this mess I had created. I turned off the main road and headed to the only place I could think of, Laurel Ridge, a small park on the outskirts of town. It was quiet, tucked away from the busy streets, and the perfect place to be alone with my thoughts. I pulled into the empty parking lot and shut off the engine, the stillness around me a sharp contrast to the chaos inside my mind. I stepped out of the car and walked over to the bench near the edge of the pond, sitting down heavily. The cool breeze rustled the leaves in the trees above, and the water rippled softly under the light of the moon. But none of it brought me any peace. I buried my face in my hands, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill over. What was I going to do? How was I supposed to go on as if nothing had happened? How could I look Ethan in the eyes and pretend that everything was fine? I had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and the weight of that betrayal was crushing me. As I sat there, staring out at the water, my mind raced with 1,000 different thoughts. I couldn't stay in this limbo any longer. I needed to make a decision. I needed to figure out what I wanted and, more importantly, what I was willing to give up. I loved Ethan. At least, I had convinced myself that I did. We had built a life together, a stable, comfortable life, and I had always thought that was enough. But now I wasn't so sure. The pull I felt toward Logan was undeniable, and the intensity of it terrified me. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something I couldn't explain or control. But was it worth throwing everything else away? Was it worth the destruction it would cause? I didn't know, and that uncertainty scared me more than anything. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in my thoughts, but by the time I finally pulled myself together, it was late. The park was empty and the streets were quiet as I made my way back home. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw that the house was dark. Ethan had already gone to bed. I slipped inside quietly, my heart pounding as I crept through the house. The silence felt oppressive, like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of my guilt. I climbed the stairs slowly, trying to steady my breathing, and when I reached our bedroom door, I hesitated. Ethan was lying on his side, fast asleep, his breathing slow and steady. The sight of him made my chest tighten with guilt. I stood there for a moment, staring at him, wondering how I had let things get so far, how I had allowed myself to betray him in such a terrible way. I slipped into bed beside him, careful not to wake him, and lay there staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind was too busy, too overwhelmed with everything that had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Logan's face, heard his voice, felt his touch. I didn't know how long I lay there, but at some point, exhaustion finally overtook me and I drifted off into a restless sleep. The next morning I woke up with a sense of dread sitting heavy in my chest. Ethan was already up and getting ready for work. I could hear the sound of the shower running in the bathroom, the familiar routine of our mornings together, but today it felt different, like I was an intruder in my own life. I got up slowly, my body aching from the tension of the night before. I padded down the hallway, my heart racing as I replayed the events in my mind. I didn't know how to face Ethan, didn't know how to look him in the eyes and pretend that nothing had changed, because everything had changed. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steaming mug in front of me. My hands were trembling and I felt like I was going to be sick. The sound of the shower stopped, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Ethan came downstairs. A few minutes later, he appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp, dressed in his work clothes. He smiled at me, that easy, familiar smile that had always brought me comfort, but today it only made me feel worse. "Morning," he said, leaning down to kiss me on the forehead. "You sleep okay?" I forced a smile, nodding as I avoided his gaze. "Yeah, I did." He grabbed his coffee and sat down across from me, glancing at his phone to check his emails. The sight of him, so calm, so unaware of what I had done, made the guilt rise up in my throat like bile. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to come clean and confess everything, but the words wouldn't come. I was a coward. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth because I knew it would destroy him, destroy us. As Ethan sipped his coffee, casually chatting about his day ahead, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my secret. The words were on the tip of my tongue, ready to spill out, but every time I opened my mouth, fear clamped it shut. I kept telling myself that maybe if I just ignored it, if I acted like nothing had happened, I could somehow fix this. I could somehow move past it. But I knew that was a lie. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Ethan kissed me goodbye on his way out the door, and as soon as I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I let out a shaky breath, slumping against the kitchen counter. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't live in this lie, this constant state of dread. I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, my mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. I kept replaying the kiss, the way Logan had looked at me, the way my heart had betrayed me. I knew I needed to do something, anything to make this right, but I didn't know where to start. By the afternoon, I found myself picking up my phone and scrolling to Logan's number. My finger hovered over the screen, hesitation gripping me, but before I could stop myself, I hit call. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Kate, his voice was cautious, as if he knew exactly why I was calling. We need to talk, I said quickly, my voice low, afraid I might lose my nerve if I hesitated any longer. Can you meet me at the park? There was a brief pause on the other end before he replied, Yeah, I can be there in 20 minutes. I hung up without saying anything else, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew we needed to talk about what had happened. We couldn't just pretend it hadn't. The park was nearly empty when I arrived, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. I parked my car and made my way to the same bench by the pond where I had sat the night before, my mind a tangled mess of thoughts and emotions. I didn't have to wait long. Logan pulled up a few minutes later, and as he walked toward me, I felt my chest tighten. He looked different today, more serious, more conflicted. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced with something much more raw, vulnerable. He sat down beside me, leaving a careful distance between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of birds chirping and the soft rustle of leaves filled the silence. I shouldn't have kissed you, I said, breaking the silence, my voice barely above a whisper. I shouldn't have let it happen. Logan didn't respond right away. He stared out at the pond, his jaw clenched, as if he was wrestling with his own thoughts. I don't regret it, he finally said, his voice low, but I know it complicates everything. I looked down at my hands, twisting them in my lap. Complicates. It ruins everything, Logan. My marriage, your marriage. It destroys everything we've built. He sighed heavily, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Do you really think what we had was that solid to begin with? I don't know about you, but I felt like I've been living a lie for years now. His words stung, but they were the truth I had been avoiding. I had been pretending for so long, pretending that my life with Ethan was enough, pretending that I didn't feel the pull toward Logan. But now all the pretending had caught up with me. I can't keep doing this, I whispered, my voice cracking. I can't live in this lie anymore. What do you want, Kate? Logan asked, his voice softer now, as if he was afraid of pushing me too far. What do you really want? I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what I want, but I know I can't keep living like this with all these secrets, all this guilt. Logan turned to me then, his expression full of conflict. I'm not asking you to leave, Ethan. I'm not asking you to blow up your life for me. But we need to figure out what this is between us and how we're going to deal with it. We can't just keep pretending. I wiped at my eyes, feeling overwhelmed by everything. I don't even know where to start. How do we deal with something that feels so wrong, but so inevitable? I don't have the answers either, Logan admitted, running a hand through his hair. But I know one thing. We can't keep going like this. We need to make a decision. Either we stop this now, or we figure out what we want from each other and deal with the consequences. I looked at him, my heart aching with the weight of the decision in front of me. Part of me wanted to walk away, to end whatever this was before it went any further. But another part of me, the part that had been longing for something more, something deeper, wasn't ready to let go. I need time, I finally said, my voice trembling. I need to figure things out. Logan nodded, his expression understanding but tense. Take all the time you need, Kate, but we can't drag this out forever. I knew he was right. Whatever decision I made, it would change everything. And once the choice was made, there would be no going back. I sat there staring at Logan, the weight of his words sinking in. The truth was staring me in the face. Whatever decision I made would have lasting consequences. I couldn't keep avoiding it, couldn't keep pretending that I could go back to the way things were. Something had to change. I don't know how to make this decision, I finally said, my voice small, almost broken. No matter what I choose, someone gets hurt. Someone's already getting hurt, Logan said quietly, his eyes soft but serious. You're hurting, Kate, and I'm hurting. We've been hurting for a long time, and it's because we've been lying to ourselves. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the tears welling up again. He was right. I had been lying to myself for years, about my marriage, about my feelings, about what I really wanted. I had been clinging to the idea of a perfect life, a perfect marriage, but that life had slipped through my fingers long ago. What do I tell Ethan? I whispered, my voice trembling. How do I explain any of this to him? I don't know, Logan admitted, his voice low. But you owe him the truth, whatever that truth is. I nodded, wiping the tears from my cheeks. The truth. I had been running from it for so long, but I couldn't run anymore. I needed to be honest, with Ethan, with Logan, and most importantly, with myself. I'll figure it out, I said softly. But I need to do it on my own. Logan looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and after a moment he nodded. I understand, just don't take too long. We both need closure one way or another. I know, I whispered. We sat there for a few more moments in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of us. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Whatever choice I made would change the course of all our lives. I should go, I said finally, standing up from the bench. My legs felt shaky, and my heart was heavy with the burden of the decision I had to make. Logan stood up too, watching me closely. Take care of yourself, Kate, he said softly, his voice full of concern. You too, I replied, giving him a small, sad smile before turning and walking back to my car. As I drove home, my mind was racing, thoughts tumbling over each other in a chaotic blur. How had my life come to this? How had I let things spiral so far out of control? I had always prided myself on being a responsible person, on making the right choices, but now I felt like I had lost control completely. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Quiet, calm, a place that had once been my refuge. But now it felt foreign, like I was walking into someone else's life. Ethan wasn't home yet, and I was grateful for the quiet as I stepped inside. I needed time to think, to figure out what I was going to say to him. I couldn't keep lying, couldn't keep pretending. But how could I break his heart? How could I destroy the life we had built together? I wandered through the house, the weight of my decision hanging over me like a dark cloud. I sat down on the couch, staring at the family photos on the wall, the happy moments we had shared. Our wedding, vacations, holidays. It all seemed like a distant memory now, like someone else's life. I felt a pang of guilt deep in my chest. Ethan didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be hurt by my mistakes, by my inability to control my feelings. But the truth was, I had been drifting away from him for years, and now there was no turning back. Later that evening, Ethan came home. He looked tired, worn out from a long day at work, but he smiled at me as he set his briefcase down by the door. "Hey," he said, walking over to kiss me on the cheek. "How was your day?" I froze for a moment, my mind racing. How was I supposed to answer that? How could I tell him that my day had been spent grappling with the decision to end our marriage, to tear apart the life we had built together? "It was fine," I finally said, forcing a smile. "How was yours?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Busy, but good. I'm glad to be home." Home. The word stung. I had always thought of this house as my home too, but now it felt like a place I didn't belong anymore. I watched as Ethan moved around the kitchen, making himself a drink, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing inside me. I wanted to tell him the truth, but the words caught in my throat. I wasn't ready. Not yet. "Dinner?" he asked, glancing over at me as he pulled out a pan from the cupboard. "I thought we could make something together." I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "Sure." But as we cooked together, as we talked about the small, mundane things from our day, the weight of my secret pressed down on me harder and harder. Every laugh, every smile felt like a lie. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. After dinner, we sat down on the couch, and Ethan turned on the TV, flipping through channels. I sat next to him, my mind racing, barely paying attention to what was on the screen. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living this lie. It was killing me inside. "I need to tell you something," I said suddenly, my voice breaking the silence. Ethan turned to look at me, his expression curious, but concerned. "What's wrong?" My heart was pounding, my hands trembling as I struggled to find the words. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, and I knew there was no turning back now. "I've made a mistake," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "A huge mistake." Ethan's expression shifted immediately, his relaxed posture straightened, his face tense with worry. "What do you mean, Kate? What mistake?" I could see the confusion and concern in his eyes, and it broke my heart even more. My hands were shaking now, my throat tight as I struggled to find the right words. I don't know how to say this," I stammered, my voice trembling, "but I need to be honest with you because I can't keep living like this." Ethan set his drink down on the table, leaning forward as he studied my face, the worry deepening in his eyes. "Whatever it is, we'll deal with it together. Just tell me what's going on." His reassurance, his trust felt like a knife twisting in my chest. He had always been the steady one, the one who believed in us, believed in me, and now I was about to shatter that belief. "I've been seeing someone," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt like poison on my tongue. I've been having an affair." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Ethan's face pale, his eyes widening in disbelief. It was as if he couldn't comprehend what I had just said, as if the words didn't make sense. "What?" he finally asked, his voice low, almost too quiet. "What are you saying?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said quickly, my voice breaking as the tears spilled down my cheeks. "I never wanted this, but it did. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry." He sat back, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair, his face contorted with pain and shock. For a long moment he said nothing. He just stared at me, as if waiting for me to tell him it was all a lie, that I hadn't really said what he thought I had. "Who?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who is it?" I felt my heart sink even further. This was the moment I had dreaded the most. It's Logan." The name hung in the air like a bomb, and I watched as the realization hit him, the betrayal etched across his face. He stood up abruptly, his breathing ragged, his hands shaking with anger. "My best friend? Logan," he shouted, his voice full of fury and disbelief. "How could you? How could you do this to me? To us. I tried to stand to explain, but the words wouldn't come. The tears were falling faster now, and all I could do was watch as the man I had loved for years crumbled in front of me. I didn't mean for it to happen, I repeated, my voice broken. I'm so sorry, Ethan. Please believe me. Sorry? Ethan spat, his voice full of hurt and rage. You're sorry? You've destroyed everything we had, everything we built together, and all you can say is you're sorry? I couldn't look at him. The guilt and shame were too much. I had destroyed our life, the life we had spent years building, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. Get out, Ethan said, his voice low but full of venom. Get out of my house. I don't want to see you. Ethan! Get out! He shouted, his voice shaking with rage. I can't look at you right now. I don't even know who you are. I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. The man who had loved me, who had stood by me through everything, now looked at me like a stranger. I wanted to explain, to make him understand how everything had spiraled out of control, but I knew it was too late. I had already done too much damage. Without another word, I turned and left the house, the tears blurring my vision as I stumbled to my car. My body shook with sobs as I drove away, not knowing where I was going, not caring. All I knew was that I had lost everything. Everything that had once mattered was gone, shattered by my own choices. The days that followed were a blur. Ethan filed for divorce almost immediately. He didn't want to hear my apologies, didn't want to hear my explanations. In his eyes, I had already said everything that mattered. I moved into a small apartment across town, far away from the house that had once been my home. I didn't speak to Logan, didn't try to contact him. It was too painful, too raw. I didn't know what I would even say. I had thought I wanted him, that we could find some kind of happiness together, but now I wasn't sure of anything. I spent my days at work, burying myself in tasks to avoid thinking about the wreckage of my life. But the nights were the hardest. Alone in my apartment, the silence was deafening. I had lost Ethan, lost the life I had once known, and the emptiness felt unbearable. Weeks turned into months, and life moved on, even though I felt stuck. Ethan and I didn't speak. Logan had moved out of the picture, back to his own life, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my own. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit living room of my apartment, staring at the city lights through the window, I realized something. This was the life I had chosen, for better or worse. There was no going back, no undoing the mistakes I had made. All I could do was move forward, even if it felt like I was walking through a fog. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I had to stop running from the truth. I had to face it, accept it, and learn to live with the consequences of my choices. And maybe, just maybe, someday I could find a way to forgive myself. Thanks for watching. The next story is ready and just as thrilling. Subscribe to catch new stories every day.